Hello, my friends and my enemies. I know a couple of you are still out there. But that's all right. We can still be close. I'm running out of liquor and I'm running out of pages. So, without further ado, we will finish the Hammer of Demons tonight, my friend. Let's see. That is incredible. It's incredible. Okay. I knew, Lord Ebendrake, that it would come to this. His voice carried down the antediluvian alley. Its slopes were built from stone axe heads and rough-hewn spear shafts, the most ancient and primal weapons of Elskan. The valley was a rift through the heart of the city, its depth cutting through aeons of war. The enemy army was strong across the valley, formed from the private forces of several Jakassi's lords. Aguthrax's slaves were tethered to posts, driven to the ground, and painted with runes of summoning. Tyresia called forth whole tribes. Scathach's contingent was the largest, with rank after rank of solemn warriors, from uniformed men with guns to armored cavalry. These forces had been called forth quickly, their plan to march on Ebendrake and kill him before he could respond. Ebendrake lived on a permanent war footing. He was ready. Perhaps it would take 1,000,000 years, he boomed, his words punctuated by plumes of black fire. Perhaps a few moments. But you would turn on me. This is the way it has always been. I am as old as these mountains and the stars above us, and I have seen it so many times that I remember only an endless circle of betrayal. I told myself that when my time came, I would defy it. Nothing you have done has been anything but inevitable, and every move you make is one I have foreseen. A great host of beetle black bodies came scuttling from the cracks between the weapons of the antediluvian valley. Thousands of scaphalids scuttled into formation behind Lord Ebendrake, carrying the banners of their tribes. The ancient general, his carapace dulled by centuries, lumbered to the fore. You are our master's master, slurred the general through his mandibles. Then you are my servant's servant, said Ebendrake. The general waved a forelimb in a signal to the scaphalids. They all drew their weapons. They were still forming up down the throat of the valley, and there must have been 100,000 of them. The will of Khorne is with us, yelled Aguthrax in reply. You have created this revolt in the heart of our city, in the midst of Khorne celebrations, all to force us to unite under your rule. This is no longer a struggle for power, Black Lizard. This is an excommunication. Khorne despises you, and his wrath turns upon you. We two lords of Jagassi are instruments of that wrath. You accuse me of treachery? Ebendrake rose up off his haunches and spat black sparks in anger. The blasphemy in the arena was not but a distraction, created to force my attention away from your betrayal. What fools, what infants, to think that such a ruse would tear victory from me. Thurgoll, an ancient from Jakassi's depths, oozed through the valley wall. All gelatinous flesh and tentacles. Other of his kind were with him, smaller and less foul, but still deadly. snapping hooked beaks set into the mass of their mollusk-like flesh. Corpses began writhing up from the ground, and the Charnel Lord, who was against the odds thrown his lots in with Lord Ebendrake, shambled through their midst, allowing them to lick the corpse liquor from his funeral robes. Ebendrake's army was huge. It was the equal of the conspirators, even if Sgolgar the Packmaster's hounds bounded in to join them. Aguthrax gave the signal, and the slaves pinned to the ground began to writhe, shafts of red light bleeding from their eyes and mouths, as his allies from the warp sent their foot soldiers to possess the slaves. "Enough words!" shouted Tiresias, knocking a flaming arrow to her bow. "On that alone we can agree," said Ebendrake. With a mighty blast of flame, he signaled the charge. A flash of savage satisfaction burst through Alric as his forehead crunched into Venalator's nose. Venalator stumbled backwards to the table, knocking the ore to the floor. The delicate device shattered, shattering tiny brass planets in orbits everywhere. Venalator tried to bring his blade around, but Alric was on top of him. Alric did not remember the time when he lost his mind, but his muscles did. It was the most natural thing in the galaxy to grab Venalator by the throat and slam him over and over into the solid table. Venalator snarled and tried to struggle free. The table split in two, and Venalator fell through to the floor, while Alric was trying to gouge out his eyes and claw at his throat. Venalator jammed his knee up into Alric's midriff and threw the Grey Knight over his head. Alric sprawled through the half-wreckage and through the archway, skidding through Kelhaldris' blood as he went. He was in Lord Ebendrake's trophy chamber. Bodies and weapons were everywhere, displayed obscenely. A gutted corpse was laid out, plated with gold and rubies, studding its wounds. It was a human in uniform, perhaps a guard general or a planetary noble, laid on a black marble slab like a sculpture. Alric saw the soft features wrapped in anguish and wondered for a moment if it had been a woman. Claws and blades, torn from the arms of aliens, were racked up on the wall beside Alric. Skulls and ribs that Alric recognized as being from Tyranid creatures formed a display in front of him. A captured siege engine, its black metal wrought into screaming faces, loomed in the middle of the room. The chamber took up a full third of the palace's cranium, and weapons and body parts taken from defeated foes littered it to the ceiling. Enormous totem poles of giant creatures' skulls, chandeliers of severed hands, statues of half-melted swords clad in skins, cut from tattooed bodies, whole enemies plated in bronze or frozen in blocks of ice, kept intact by consuming cryo units. Spears and swords, by the hundred, displayed in fearsome walls of blades, lifetimes upon lifetimes of battles and duels, of treacheries avenged, and would-be assassins uncovered. A terrible illustration of what Lord Ebendrake truly was. Alric pulled himself into the shadows, between a pair of mummified corpses, still impaled on the spikes used to execute them. He weighed up his situation in a split second, as only a Space Marine's mind could. Alric wasn't unarmed anymore. He could have his pick from any one of 1,000 wicked-looking weapons on display in the trophy room. But Vanalator was still the best swordsman Alric had ever faced. He was too good. "Face me, Space Marine!" cried Vanalator as he stalked into the trophy chamber. "Truly, your Emperor must be a weakling god, if even his very finest cowers as you do." "You add too many flourishes to your sword work," replied Alric. "I noticed it when you beat me on Sarthus Majoris. Such a thing focuses the mind." Alric took a blade from the closest mummified corpse, a bronze scimitar, inscribed with runes that he drew silently from the corpse's chest. "If there's any one thing I have learned here, it is that bloodshed is an ugly thing." "Bloodshed is an art!" snapped Vanalator. "And you are my canvas!" Vanalator swept over a display of mummified bodies, the skirts of his armor billowing behind him like wings. Alric deflected the arc of the sword with his scimitar, and the bronze weapon was sliced in two. Alric spun, pulled a spike from the skull of a second body, and parried again. Vanalator's sword was knocked by a centimeter away from gutting Alric, and the spike was split in two lengthwise. Alric lunged forward and kneed Vanalator in the groin. Vanalator stumbled backwards, bent double, and Alric sent an uppercut into his chest so hard that Vanalator plunged backwards through the bodies, scattering dried-out limbs and fragments of age-stiffened funeral shrouds. "Too many flourishes," replied Alric. Vanalator got to his feet. He snarled, and for a moment, the true nature beneath the cultured swordsman flashed across him. A yawning maw hissed through a ring of fangs, and black eyes narrowed into reptilian slits. There was, however, no one to see it. Vanalator braced himself for the next charge, but it did not come. He looked around, but Justicar Alric was gone. It was not like a Space Marine at all, but that did not matter. Alric was ultimately like any other query, a puzzle to be solved, a life to be ended. Vanalator prayed to a few syllables to Khorne to keep his sword keen, and began to hunt. "Navigation's still up," said Erkar breathlessly. "Praise the Emperor, praise the saints!" He swung the command pulpit and read from the age-clouded information panel in front of him. "It's working! There's plasma in the conduits! The reactors are warming up!" The smiles on the faces of the faithful were reason enough to have made it this far. It was like a rapture, as if the image of the Emperor was hovering on the bridge of the Hammer of Demons, bestowing his blessing upon them. The ship worked. The promised land was real. "Takeoff vectors are preloaded," said one of the faithful from navigation's helm, surrounded by slab-like banks of mem crystal. "They're all up. Once the thrusters are online and the main engines are primed, we can take off." "Wait," said Erkar. "Raziel's followers programmed this ship to fly into a warp rift. Those must be the coordinates in the navigation helm. Use it to take off and then switch to helm control. Otherwise, we'll pitch straight into the warp." Then that's it? It's ready to fly?" asked Brother Hogan's. The man looked dazed. The events of the last few minutes almost too much for him to understand. It seemed like only a breath ago that the slaves had been about to die. Now they had a spaceship. "It is," said Erkar. "This is a miracle, an honest miracle. To those who denied the Emperor's light, I give to you the Hammer of Demons." The hammer was a vessel worthy of the Emperor's intervention. Exposure to Dracassi's elements had covered it in a sheath of corrosion, but the ship inside was magnificent. Raziel's followers had spared no expense. The corridors and bays shone in deep blue and gold, with a saint's portrait looking over every doorway and porthole. Shrines to the emperor could be found everywhere, from the simple niches with devotional candles and texts to the great three-faced altar in the ship's main assembly area, with which the tripitch wrought in gold, depicting the emperor as deliverer, protector, and avenger. The bridge was a reliquary, with sacred bones and vials of saintly blood, hovering in miniature grav units, bathed in shafts of light, and a ring around the helms and command pulpit. Erkar had never seen something so beautiful, not even the days before his enslavement. The Pax Dianatetos had been an ugly ship, a base thing of rusting steel and leaking conduits. The hammer was a flying altar to imperial glory. "We should pray," said Brother Huygens uncertainly. "We can pray when we're off the ground," replied Erkar. He flicked a switch and accessed the ship's voxcaster. "Engines?" "Here, Lieutenant," came the reply. "Here, Lieutenant," came the reply. It was Gareth. Erkar flinched at the thought of Gareth having a place on their holy ship, but he would be judged like the rest of them when the promised land was in sight. "Reactor status? Looks like they're working. 25%, if that means anything." "It does," said Erkar. "Keep me updated." "Yes, Lieutenant." "Lieutenant," said the faithful at the navigation helm, "you need to see this." Erkar hurried to the navigation helm. Over the faithful's shoulder, he saw the cartographic readout that he had pulled up. "That's Jakasi," said the faithful, pointing to a planet marker on the screen. "And this is the route still loaded in the navigation cogators. It looks like the route the ship was on when it crashed here." Erkar followed the arc of the ship's path. Its destination was only a short distance from Jakasi. With a good fast ship such as the Hammer, undoubtedly as it was, it could be reached in less than an hour. "They were so close," said Erkar. "It must have been the Emperor's will that brought the Hammer down to Jakasi before they reached it. Whatever happened to the ship's pilgrims on Jakasi, it was surely no worse than what lay past the rift." "We'll still clear," said the faithful. "But what then?" "Get clear of Jakasi. Clear the eye if we can," said Erkar. His eyes shone. "Then we find the promised land." Every single thing and Velskan had chosen its side. The power of treachery flowed through the streets of the city like pure molten hatred. Smiths turned their hammers on one another. Drill demons on the parade grounds ordered one rank to attack another. Strangers in the street called out who was with them and who was against, and knives came out in the alleyways. Half pledged themselves to Ebendrake and the correct order of Jakasi's monarchy. Half devoted themselves to toppling him, to disorder, to ruination, and chaos. Two armies collided all across the city, not just in the antediluvian vale, but across Velskan. In every temple and forge, every place one human could murder another. In the valley, Lord Ebendrake himself led the charge. His great wings pounded once, and he hauled himself up into the air, crashing down on Tiresias the huntress. He dug her crushed body from beneath him, flipped her into the air, and snapped his jaws shut on her, swallowing her in one gulp. Thousands of arrows and spears rained against him, but he breathed out a sheet of black fire over Tiresias' tribespeople, and 100 of them died, gutted to charred skeletons by the force of Ebendrake's anger. Thousands of Scathach's men slammed into the scapholid tide. Scathach himself drew the ancient bolt gun from his back, a relic of his days in the traitor legions, and put bolter shells through a score of scapholid bodies as his ranks of warriors struggled to hold back the living wave. The slaves, staked to the ground, exploded, gore showering down as demons fresh and raw from the warp emerged from their possessed bodies. Wet muscle glistened all over them, new limbs withering and reforming as they vomited scalding blood and ripping into the slimy host led by Thurgle. The Charnel Lord's dead horde clambered over the bodies as they mounted up, dragging soldiers and demons into caves of the newly dead to devour them. The battle spilled out of the valley. Demonic spawn and tentacled horrors from the sea wrestled to the temple galleries and scarred precincts, scattering statues and relics of corn. Tiresia's surviving hunters took the battle to the air, flying their aerial beasts of prey into a swirling melee with winged demons streaming from Valscal's eyries. After a few minutes, no one remembered why they were fighting. There was a sense of betrayal on both sides, but the details were lost in the blood. Agathrax, thrashing with a large mace in his cauldron, was hauled forwards through the heaps of dead, and did not care to remember just why he had ordered his battered army forwards into the heart of the scatheless mass. The Charnel Lord let the events leading up to the battle sink down into the fevered pit of his mind, and concentrated instead on the holy work of bringing the battle dead back to half-life and setting them on the men they had been fighting alongside. Eben Drake alone remembered. Part of him stayed calm enough through the carnage to remind him that if he lost, he lost Jakasi! He would rather die as a king than live as someone else's slave, and was right and proper for a servant of the blood god. Lord Ebendrake sought death as eager as he sought victory, and there was no shortage of it choking every avenue of Valscan. The echoes of the battle ripped through Jakasi, like an earthquake reaching right through the planet's core. Every one of the planet's great cities felt it, and they too were suddenly divided. The madmen of the Scourged stopped ranting and put their divinations aside to bludgeon one another with anything they could find, or hurl one another to the sea. Crested demonfish rose from the depths to bask in the blood that foamed beneath the abater temples of the Scourge. The singing of Azaldine turned dark and clashing, as if its voices were replaced by the gurgle of blood and slit throats. Gorgoth's battle lines were suddenly redrawn, one army under the banner of the dragon, and the other preaching revolution as they died. Gaul seethed with murder, its gutters overflowing with blood, and its night alive with the sound of knives through flesh. Carnacal began to slowly devour itself. Drakasi quaked. The day turned blood red, while on the other side of the planet the stars grew into burning rubies, like eyes gorged with bloodshed. Howling winds ripped across the plains, rousing every living thing into a frenzy, turning hidden cabals of cultists against one another, or forcing the jungles into bouts of continent-wide cannibalism. Predators and prey turning on their own, even in the depths of sea. Bizarre creatures, unknown to the surface, ripped one another to shreds with needle-like teeth. There was a sound on the wind that carried further than the clashing of blades and the screams of the dying. It was laughter. Korn was enjoying this particular spectacle. Duke Venalator left behind footprints of Keldros' blood as he stalked through the trophy chamber. He had never been here. Very few, save Eberdrake, ever had. He did not know his way around. He had not expected it to be this huge, for there to be so many places for Alric to hide. Somewhere in the sea of corruption, the Venalator had a mind. Frustration surfaced. The men you killed in your madness, said Venalator. They were the ones I took from the cities of Sathis Majoris. Some of your guardsmen, too. Did you recognize them as you killed them? There was no answer from the darkness. Night had fallen, and the only light bled from a few glowing orbs scattered around the trophy collection, apparently placed there to make the shadows longer. What about Skarhadoth? I saw you kill him. You are the champion of Jakasi. How does it feel to be proclaimed the champion's most dedicated servant to Khorne? A footstep reached Venalator's ears. He froze, his blade held low, ready to cut the legs out from under the charging gray knight. Venalator pivoted and sliced through the dark shape looming towards him. His blade cut clean through the body, the hanging body, strung by a noose from the ceiling, an executed enemy of Ebendrake's, left to dangle and rot in the trophy room. He was jumping at nothing. Alric smashed through a bank of blades and shields, scattering ancient weapons everywhere. A sword, a blade hammered down and caught Venalator's sword, snapping the star-forged metal and sending half the blade spinning off into the shadows. Venalator threw himself backwards. He barely escaped being bowled to the ground by Alric's impact. Alric landed heavily, but on his feet, crackling, he carried a halberd in his hand, the nemesis weapon of a Grey Knight. In his other hand was the gauntlet-mounted Storm Bolter. I hope Ebendrake enjoyed your little gift, said Alric, noticing the moment of shock passing over Venalator's face as he saw Alric's weapons. It cost you more than you realize. Alric's eyes flickered down to the haft in his hand and the broken stump of his blade. I did it. Oops, Whoa, what the fuck? Come on. Not gonna focus for me? Venalator's face. Venalator's eyes flickered down to the haft in his hand and the broken stump of his blade. That was my favorite sword, he growled. He gave up all pretense that he was a normal man, and his features melted away, his nose and mouth forming into one circular fanged orifice, and his eyes becoming liquid slits. With a practiced motion, Venalator drew a pair of short swords from his back. Now, said Alric, we are almost even. Almost, hissed the thing that called itself Duke Venalator. The ring of their blades clashed so rapid and relentless that it sounded like the trophy chamber was filled with driving rain. Venalator slashed too fast to see, but his blades rang off Alric's halberd. Alric knocked Venalator back with raw strength, his greater reach letting him hack out in arcing strikes, too artless to wound, but enough to force Venalator back across the chamber, step by step. Alric fired a burst from his storm bolter, Venalator swatted the bolter shells away like insects. Venalator ducked low and cut down at Alric's knees. Alric blocked one strike with the butt of his halberd, swinging the blade down to turn the second, and kicked out to catch Venalator in the chin. A deep cut was opened in Venalator's monstrous face, and from the wound reached tendrils of blood, snaking towards Alric's limbs to entangle them and leave the Grey Knight defenseless. Alric grabbed a handful of the tendrils with his bolter hand and forced them to his mouth. He bit into them, tearing at them, like he had torn at the raw meat at the Harathan sacrifice in his half-remembered madness. The tendrils fell limp, and Alric spat out blood. He had learned a lot. He could fight like an animal when he had to. He could give up everything he had ever been taught in the dueling vaults of Titan, and revert to the brutality written into his blood. He could go further than his enemy, be more relentless, more devoted to bloodshed. That was what Jakasi had taught him. Alric shattered one of Venalator's swords, knocked the other one aside, and grabbed the swordsman's wrist. He picked Venalator up and threw him through the great siege engine in the center of the chamber. The machine came apart and collapsed, scattering blood-black timbers and chunks of iron everywhere. Venalator rolled to his feet and got to his knees. Alric didn't give him the chance to regain his feet. He picked up a length of wood and smacked Venalator around the side of the head, hard enough to throw him back again, crashing through a stand of ornamental armor. Venalator's hand closed on something. He was on the edge of a sudden drop. He had come to rest on the edge of the opening formed by the skull's eye socket. To one side, through the other side, stabbed the corroded form of the Hammer of Demons, shards of rust flaking as it shuddered with the force of its engines. Beneath was Velskan. The sight of Velskan at war was enough to strike the voice from Venalator's throat. Armies clashed in the streets. Banners of a dozen lords waved as their followers clashed. A gout of black flame showed that Eben Drake himself was fighting. The outskirts of Velskan were already aflame, tinting Jakasi's night in a dull orange. Demons danced to the carnage. Killers competed to die first. Survival was never enough. This was you, said Venalator. His monstrous face was bleeding away at the rage that was replaced with wonder. Aguthrax and I, Razael, Gorgoth, your madness, it was you! It was all your plan! Of course, I am a Grey Knight. I could hardly come to a world like Jakasi and leave it intact. You turned us against one another. Our hatred was our strength and our weakness, our pride, our wrath, our devotion. All these were just a weapon for you. Venalator smiled. The dark gods would be proud of you, Justicar. Alric had never heard something so hateful because he knew it was true. He fired his Stormbolter point blank in Venalator's chest. Venalator's armor held, but the force of the exploding bolt shell was enough to knock him off his feet. There was no floor behind him to break his fall. He dropped his sword as he flailed at nothing. Venalator fell from the eye socket of Lord Eben Drake's castle. Tendrils of blood lashed out for something to grab onto, but they found nothing. His eyes met Alric's as he fell, and there was something like horror in them. Alric watched Venalator fall, falling him down to the darkness of Velskan. Halvern had to be avenged. Alric sought some elation at that, but it was as elusive as Razael's truth. There could be no triumph in this tainted world. Alric turned away from the eye socket, away from the sight of Velskan at war, and headed to the Hammer of Demons. The hammer was shuddering as its plasma reactors filled with superheated fuel. Most of the corrosion had been shaken off, revealing the deep blue of its hull and the gold-painted decoration. It must have been a truly magnificent craft when it was launched. It was still extraordinary, and it was ready to take off. Alric hurried up the steps towards the torture chamber, dragging his armor behind him. He saw that the boarding ramp of the hammer was still down, but judging by the roar of the engines, it wouldn't stay that long. It was time to leave Jacassi. He heard footsteps behind him. He turned to see One Ear and the surviving orcs, still slathered in scapholid blood. One Ear looked at Alric, and then at the Hammer of Demons, and in his alien mind he must have known that this was the only chance he had to get off Jacassi. One Ear spat on the ground, snarled at Alric, and led his orcs back down the steps toward the war-torn streets of Jacassi. "Just the car!" shouted Corporal Dorvos from the ship's boarding ramp. "We're on autopilot. We'll leave you behind if we have to." Alric hurried up the ramp just as it began to close and the engines rose in pitch. Plasma was coursing through the ship's conduits, swirling from the reactors through the engines inside. The Harathans were finding whatever they could to hold on to as the ship began to shudder even more, throwing aside anything that wasn't affixed. Candles rolled across the tilting floor, and sacred texts fluttered from the walls. "I see you found your gear," said Dorvus, looking down at the power armor that Alric was hauling along. "If you get us off this planet, you'll have earned it back." "Where are we going?" "We'll worry about that once we're off Jacassi," replied Dorvus. The hammer's engines flared, and all sound was drowned out as the plasma reactors came online. The whole ship lurched, and the sound of breaking bone signaled that the ship, after centuries, embedded in the palace of Velscon, was finally taking off. Lord Ebendrake's palace split in two. Shards of bone fell and impaled battling cultists on the palace approach below. The engines flared and blew out the back of the cranium, incinerating dozens as the plasma fire spewed from the exhaust housings. The cranium collapsed, burying the torture chamber and trophy hall in a rock slide of fragmented bone. The Hammer of Demons was finally free. The last of the corrosion was thrown off it, and, lit by the fires of the burning city, the ship rose on vertical thrusters to look out over Velscon. Very few saw it. Most were too busy killing and being killed. A few did notice it and assumed it was a weapon called forth by Ebendrake or the conspirators. Perhaps Ebendrake's enemy had sent it to destroy the palace, or perhaps Ebendrake had finally chosen to reveal it, sacrificing his palace to bring some ancient wrath down on Agathrax and his fellow traitors. Very few of those who saw it particularly cared. It was just a distraction from the killing. Alric fought to keep his footing as he pushed his bulk through the door and the bulkhead designed for a man a meter shorter. The hammer shuddered again, and Alric nearly fell. He had to hurry. By the time the hammer escaped Jacassi's atmosphere, it might be too late. The flight deck of the Hammer of Demons was as lavishly decorated as the rest of the ship. The blue walls were inlaid with long ribbons of gold, forged into images from the life of the prophet Raziel. The ship's shuttlecraft had survived the years intact, sealed inside the flight deck away from the ravages of Jacassi. It was deep blue and chased in gold like the rest of the ship, and decorated with multiple stylized mouths, with Alric realized with a lurch, must be the symbol of Raziel. A dozen mouths had spoken from the demon's flesh as it taunted him. Alric opened the access hatch and the body of the shuttle and threw his war gear inside. He could wear it again when it had been purified. "Good idea," said Gareth. Alric turned to see the killer, still smeared with blood and war paint. "This thing's full of mental cases. They think we're flying right up to the Emperor's arse. If they're wrong, we could end up anywhere. And if they're right, well, me and the Emperor ain't seen the eye to eye since I was born." "Why are you here?" asked Alric. "Same reason as you," replied Gareth. "To get off this thing and take my chances on my own. You're tough, Justicar, but you don't know the nethers of the Imperium like me. Fighting's all very well, but me? I could hitchhike my way out of the eye. You could use someone like me around. You said once, said Alric, that you didn't know why you committed your crimes, why you killed those women. Gareth glanced around, as if he was afraid someone was listening. I guess. Why does it matter? You never will. Alric shot Gareth once in the stomach. The bolter shell exploded in his abdomen and blew out a length of spine out his back. Gareth flopped to the ground. The blood! He gasped. The blood God promised! Alric started to chamber. Alric started to clamber in the shuttle. You're gonna leave him? Said Gareth, his pained whisper barely audible over the ship's engines. Gonna leave them all? The guard boys? Everyone? Just to die out there? Alric ignored the dying man and hauled the shuttle's hatch closed behind him. The cockpit was barely big enough for Alric to fit. He thumbed the command stud, and the flight doors ground open. The air in the deck boomed out into the thin atmosphere and took Gareth's body with it, the flimsy corpse trailing blood as it tumbled out into Jakassi's night. Alric gunned the shuttle engines and flew it out of the flight deck, feeling the waves of superheated air from the hammer's engines, buffeted as if it was a fallen leaf. He wrestled for control. He cleared the hammer's wake, and now he had it back. Now it was really time to get away from this planet. The flight deck just opened, said Haggard, clinging to a guardrail around a floating relic. As he stumbled onto the bridge, someone took a shuttle out. Then they have forsaken their life's reward, replied Erkar calmly. The streams of the upper atmosphere were hammering against the hull, and everything loose was being thrown about, but Erkar was as calm as if he was sailing on a glassy sea. The rift in space in front of him filling the bridge with crimson light, opening to swallow the hammer of demons. What is it? Asked Haggard. The rift, said Erkar. Switch off the autopilot. We'll take her away from Jakassi on manual. Yes, Lieutenant, said the faithful at the navigation helm. The Emperor will show us the way, said Erkar, as the ship swung from the rift towards the billowing nebulae of the Eye of Terror. We have but to listen, in our prayers, in our dreams. There is the way to the promised land. Duke Venaltor's body was impaled on one of the many swords making up the web of steel, into which were built the thousands of homes where Velskon's poorest dwelt. The point went through his back and out his chest, just below the scar on his armor left by Alric's bolter shot. He was alive when he hit. With his spine cut, Venalator couldn't even writhe, just lie there as the pain racked through him, and his body slowly slid down the blade. No one noticed him die. Below him was a battle with no lines, a swirling melee where all sense of order and alignment had broken down, and everyone was out just killing for himself. It was a riot, a massacre, and a scene being repeated throughout Velskon. But more than that, it was infecting the whole of Jakassi. Venalator's head lolled to one side. He could see something burning in a blood river snaking out of Elskon's outskirts. It was a ship, his ship, the Hecatomb, cut loose from its moorings beneath the city. It blazed from stem to stern. The wards would have been breached. What was held prisoner there would escape. Venalator knew then that he should have killed it when he had the chance. For somehow, for someone who had not been human for so long, the last thing Venalator felt was a very human emotion. He felt despair. Alric saw the army falling back through the city, beetled black forms of scaphulids pouring in through every side. He saw Agothrax, carried by a tide of demons, blazing a path of fire ruination toward Ebendrake's palace. Agothrax would take the palace, but once there, he would find its greatest prize was already gone. He saw Ebendrake on the pinnacle of a mighty temple, holding its brass dome against a horde of Velskon's citizens who had gathered in a spontaneous army to bring him down. He incinerated them by the dozen, but there were too many of them, and they had set the temple alight, and were working at its columns with picks and hammers. Soon it would collapse, and even Lord Ebendrake would be gone. Similar scenes were playing out all across the city. Streets were like cities of fire, buildings like sacrificial candles, battle like a disease gradually claiming everything. Alric looked away from the city. There was nothing he could do now to make it worse. He aimed the shuttle's control upward, accelerating to orbital speed. He glanced down at the fuel gauge. Much of the fuel had evaporated in the ship's tanks in its years lying idle, but there was just enough to get him out of orbit. Once he was beyond the atmosphere, and perhaps to somewhere the Inquisition would find him, that was why he had left the Hammer of Demons. Even if Erkar's Promised Land was not real, there was no place in it for Alric. Not yet. The swirls of Jakasi's atmosphere gave way to the diseased void of the Eye of Terror. It wasn't a good place to be cut adrift, but it was safer than Jakasi. Alric could survive for years if he had to in half-sleep. His brain could shut down until only the most basic of life processes were continued. After Jakasi, he could do with a few good years to think it all over. As Alric let the main engines kick in, a plume of orange flame licked up from Velskon. It was Ebendrake's temple, finally collapsing in a ball of fire. Ebendrake was probably dead. Alric took no satisfaction at all from that knowledge. The rumble of the planet's atmosphere ceased, and Alric left Jakasi forever. Rosael the Cunning licked the blood from Dorvas's face. Around him, hundreds of Harathans lay torn and bloody on the deck of the Hammer of Demons. He had come to them as swift as a whirlwind, their tiny, determined minds reduced to fear and then silenced by Rosael's touch. He had slid through the corridors and the decks of the ship. It was familiar, as one of his own forms, like a cloak of flesh that fit him perfectly. The shrines and inscriptions put up by pilgrims who never understood what they were doing. The ship's own structure itself was a subtle prayer to the liar god. The smell and the feel of it. The Hecatomb had burned. The wards about his prison had crumbled, and Rosael had been free. His punishment at Venalator's hands had been severe, but Rosael was still a demon, still a thing of the warp, and he was still dangerous. He had bled through Velskon, reveling in the war overtaking it, and found the Hammer of Demons as he had left it, and the half-blinded skull. Boarding it had been simple. Sighting down the Harathans had been more taxing than Rosael had anticipated, for he was out of practice. But it felt so good to be free, so good to kill. He would soon get the hang of it again. Rosael slipped up the decks towards the bridge. As he went, the Harathans tried to fight him, but their eyes went blind with shock as he punched tentacles through their stomachs, or extended golden sickle blades to slice them apart. Some he sucked dry, leaving them husks, like cast-off skins of lizards. A few he melted into the sacred walls of the hammer, or turned inside out. He was powerful now. He was free of his bonds. One form had been crippled, but 100 more emerged into existence. He was glorious. He was the lie-given form. The bridge was ahead. Raziel melted the blast doors in a pool of molten gold. Inside was the most beautiful collection of minds that Raziel had seen for many centuries. They believed. He could taste their faith. They believed in a religion that had sprung up from the detritus of Raziel's own flock. Snatches of sacred writings, half-formed memories of the pilgrimage. From nothing had sprung yet more believers in the lie. Raziel laughed. What a wondrous thing! Without willing it, his deception of his pilgrim flock had given rise to a whole new breed of deluded faithful. Raziel had swept in the bridge, taking on the form of a nightmare. Erkar grabbed the auto pistol, holstered beneath the command pulpit. He didn't bother to aim, since the demon boiling in the bridge was large enough for any shot to hit it. He loosed off half the weapon's magazine, ears full of screams and rushing blood. Huygens disappeared into the demon's churning blue gold mass. They had come so close. They had left Jakasi and its horrors behind, and now this? At least they got a taste of what it meant to be free. This was what Erkar told himself, as bladed tendrils wrapped around his waist and sliced his stomach open. He was lifted off the pulpit. He dropped his pistol and his hand with it, a golden side having sliced through his arm at the wrist. He looked into scores of eyes and mouths looming in front of him, and knew instinctively that he was in the clutches of Raziel the Cunning. Erkar screamed in defiance, and 100 mouths devoured him. Raziel reached out and plucked the soul from the faithful at the navigation helm, rending the insubstantial stuff of the spirit from the fleshy frame. Other pilgrims were trying to flee or fight back. Those who fought amused Raziel greatly, stabbing at him with whatever came at hand. A couple had guns from the ship's armory. Raziel churned the floor beneath them to liquid, and they sank to their thighs in molten gold, spasming in shock as they were incinerated. The Hammer of Demons was a fine ship. Once the bridge was clear, Raziel could take it over and fly to a new world. There he would begin again. He would find himself on a planet of the ignorant and desperate and give them a prophet. Tzeentch would finally have his due. Raziel absorbed a man named Huygens and devoured his memories, glimpsing scenes of life, of fear and horror, and the final delicious denial of his faith. He was so enraptured with eating Huygens' ignorant mind that for a moment Raziel did not notice the last survivor grabbing the auto pistol on the floor. Haggard kicked Erkar's severed hand aside and picked up the auto pistol. He stumbled back against the navigation helm as the full horror of Raziel oozed finally into the bridge. The last few faithful were disappearing into its mass. Haggard knew that the others of the ship were dead. There would be no freedom from Jakasi. None of them would survive. Finally, Haggard understood that survival was not enough. Hundreds of eyes turned to look at him. Haggard didn't know if he could move. It was the most horrible thing he had ever seen. Glowing blue flesh and golden blades, rippling with silver. Where are my friends? He stuttered. Are they dead? Of course, said Raziel in 100 voices at once. Good. He slammed the butt of the pistol down on the navigation helm. The command stud rescinded the last coordinates input the coagator. The Hammer of Demons reverted back to its previous course. The way to the Promised Land. Haggard emptied the rest of the gun's ammunition into the navigation helm. The controls exploded in sparks and blue flames. Haggard fell to the deck, slick with the blood of the faithful. Raziel the Cunning looked up at the view screen. The Hammer of Demons swung around, stars marching past. until the view centered on the glowing red slash in space. It was the warp rift, the gateway to the warp, which Raziel had promised to deliver souls for Zanch. The demon's eyes widened into something like fear. Raziel threw Haggard aside, but the controls were ruined. Raziel's realm was the human mind. Machines were just tools, just pieces of metal. He had no way of rewriting the ship's cogators, as he might rewrite the memories of a victim. Deep inside the warp rift, a great golden eye opened. The hammer of Demon's main engines kicked in, propelling the ship towards the rift. It grew larger and larger on the view screen, the eye unblinking, transfixing Raziel where he stood. "Raziel!" said a voice that boiled up from the warp. "You promised me souls! You promised me the faithful! You have failed me!" For those last few moments, Raziel screamed and Haggard laughed. Alric watched from the cockpit of the shuttle as the hammer of demons suddenly veered off course. Main engines flaring, the ship rocketed toward the red slash that Alric had guessed was the warp rift, the intended destination of Raziel's flock. There could be little doubt that everyone on the ship was doomed. Dorvos and the brave men of the Harathan armored cavalry, who were failed once more by Alric, Erkar, whose faith had kept him sane, while men like Gareth were losing their souls, and Haggard, the only friend Alric really had on Jacassi. He tried to grieve for them. He tried to feel the weight of their deaths on him, but he was tired and he could feel nothing. Alric lay back on the grav seat of the shuttle. The constellations of the Eye of Terror whirled around him, and their endless pattern, unconquerable and infinite. Alric wanted very much to sleep. He surrendered his mind to the suspended animation membrane that covered his brain, and the stars went dark. Man, you can focus if you want to, I guess. Yeah, great read, fantastic read. Someone online said it was the worst in the Grey Knight series, but I don't know. You don't get much better than this book in particular. I think there's two different kind of Space Marine stories. All right, there's the typical one where you're going to be reading about a captain and he's going to be in charge of people, and it gives you more, since he's a captain, he gives you more of a top-down perspective, but he's not a chapter master, so there's a little bit of a mystery, behind it. There's a little bit of okay, he takes his orders from someone, he's not infallible. So it kind of gives you that medium scope, medium scope in the chain of command. But this is a different one. It's simply just the hero's journey. It's just the classic hero's journey. It doesn't come with a chain of command, and that's, I don't know. It's seeing a Space Marine on their own is pretty great. I don't not sure which one I'm gonna do next, but I mean, the very the big takeaway here, right, is Alric had his revolution. Okay, he got all these people together, and I mean, in the end, Gareth. I mean, I guess Gareth did have a place in the ship, but Gareth overstepped his bounds. Okay, he's a murderer, a killer. He was just a bad man that Alric got to do. I wouldn't say good things, but useful bad things. And then there was Kelhadros, who no, never let him come. No, never let him. No, never let Kelhadros. No, he didn't deserve it. It took everything Alric had not to just snap that alien's mind, spine in half. The orcs at least understood. They They got it, you know, and I almost think it's just because where would they go? Where would the orcs go? Jakasi is their home because their home is bloodshed. That's it. But I got just a little bit incoherent. But Alric knew that there was no place for him on the Hammer of Demons, and he knew that it was just the whole time. He knew that if anyone was getting off, it was going to be him and no one else. And like Erkar was even like, look, we're not going to be your pawns, okay? You think we're religious, so we're just going to go die for you because you're a space marine? How about no? But the thing is, Alric never really promised him anything. He just said, we're getting off this plane. I mean, I guess he promised him that, which is pretty... I guess there's an implication there. He said, we're getting off this planet, which was true, but... Alric played him. Alric used them. But, you know, Huygens, honestly, out of Urkar's Faithful, like, at the end of the book, the navigation guy was just called the Faithful. He was just a Faithful. Like, that was just, he didn't have a name. So I'm glad that was that, but, like, there was Haggard and Huygens, and I don't even know who, I mean, their name comes up over and over in the book, but they're just, I guess, like, Haggard, I mean, Alric said that Haggard was his only friend on Jakasi, but I don't even remember them doing anything except talking to each other sometimes on the Hecatomb. So I don't... What? Space Marines have friends? I don't know. It was weird. But Huygens, because he was so strong, the depth and breadth of his memories was enough to entertain Raziel long enough for Huygens to mess up the console. And that, you know, Erkar bought them time by shooting at the thing and then dying. And then Huygens just bought time by dying. So Haggard could do the thing. And honestly, it's great. The ending, Raziel got what he deserved. Raziel absolutely got what he deserved. I'm so glad Raziel got what he deserved. There's like a lot of foreshadowing. I mean, Raziel was like the final boss, and it, you know, there was a big build up to him, and in a way, you think he's defeated, but not really. Eben Drake gets his mighty strength gets foreshadowed like the entire book. How he even says he likes to eat people alive, and then he just ate Tiresias in one bite, a single bite. So she was probably dissolving away in his guts while he fought. Vanalator, I guess Vanalator and Skarhadoth, it was just their hubris that ended up defeating them. Alric tried to fight them with the measured scale of a Great Knight, and he lost. I think, yeah, at Sarthus Majoris, and then is it Gorgoth? No, it's not Gorgoth. It's another place that he lost against Skarhadoth. And I'm glad that the battles were against them were brief. The final showdown was pretty brief, and it's the context behind the showdown that makes it good, not the showdown itself. So yeah, I don't know. I had a lot of fun reading it. Aloud. And I mean, there was even one point, right? And I mean, the book wouldn't have ended well, all right? It wouldn't have ended well, but Alric was like, what if I'm the Hammer of Demons? Like, what if the Hammer of Demons is just... Well, yeah, he brought it down to a couple things. He brought it down, like, you know, maybe I'm the Hammer of Demons, or maybe the Hammer of Demons is in every one of us. Maybe it's just a religion made up by Khorne to give people just a little bit of faith. Oh my gosh, my mouse doesn't work. I could not begin to guess in a million zillion years as to how my mouse would have gotten disconnected within the last hour and 5 minutes. That is baffling. Come on, you son.